Welcome to the Reinventing Education podcast. I'm Rob McLeod. This is a podcast for teachers, students, or parents who are interested in reinventing what education is. In the autumn, we spoke with 6 groups who we believe are on the cutting edge of education. If you're into Frederick Laloux or integral theory, you might classify these as teal or integral organizations. What's interesting is these educators, schools, or consultants are spread around the world, and they had not been connecting or communicating directly with each other. Yet, they've each emerged with very similar characteristics. On our last few episodes, Brendan and we've been trying to connect the dots between these 6 interviews, highlighting commonalities between those on the leading edge of school. Today, we focus on the question of what should be taught in school, and we filter back through our 6 interviews to try and articulate an answer for this. Now, what should be taught in school? The answer to this question will largely be informed by the values that you hold. On the podcast in the past, we've discussed 4 values at play informing what education looks like. Self-discipline being one, ambition another, sensitivity, and development. On this episode, we'll articulate what should be taught in school if you value development, that 4th value. We'll discuss the beliefs of the previous 3 values and what they think should be taught in school. We discuss how curriculum has changed over time, moving away from content towards skills and where this might go next. We'll explore the balance between the demands of what school says you must demonstrate an understanding of with how much freedom and agency a student can be provided with to self-direct their own learning. We'll also discuss how different school cultures and systems reinforce what should be learned and how it should be learned. I'm pretty sure you'll be able to follow this discussion, even if you haven't listened to the 6 interviews, but we do name drop some of the educators we spoke with and the institutions they're involved with, so as a quick refresher, here's a quick overview of who we make mention of. Chris Baum of the Millennium School, a middle school in San Francisco. We've spoken with Armin Sieber of the Integrales Tagesschule in Winterthur, a high school in Switzerland, Traian, Anna, and Karina of the Alternative University, a self-directed learning culture in Romania, integral educational consultant Silke Weiss from Germany and Learn Kulturzeit, education leader Katerina Yasko from Ukraine, and Joran Oppold, a parent involved in the unschooling scene in Florida. By the end of this episode, we hope you will inquire with yourself about your beliefs and values regarding what should be taught in school. Ultimately, about 200 years ago, we created compulsory nationwide schooling, and back then we decided what should be taught. Now, sure, we've been altering it over time, but in 2019, we still have the opportunity to reinvent what school is by deciding what should be taught now. Think of it like packing a car for a summer vacation. You can fill the station wagon with everything you've always brought with you, new things you've decided to bring along the way, or you can take everything out, put it out on the driveway, and only put back in the items that best serve this vacation, and possibly deciding on some new items to bring with you now. If you think about serving the vacation more than appreciating and acknowledging the previous packing list, this is kind of the idea we're going for here. So, enjoy. What should be taught in school? Brendan O'Leary.
Rob McLeod.
Beliefs about learners.
Yes.
From the people we've talked to. What do developmental-minded people believe about learners?
Okay, so we're kind of moving now into the level of the teaching, the learning, and within the classroom. So a lot of what we're talking about here is taking those sociocratic or horizontal kind of ideas of leadership and moving them down into a smaller group. And so what we will see and what we'll speak about a lot is the teachers and learners and the curriculum being responsive to the needs of the students. And because we're dealing with smaller groups, often we'll see a lot more negotiation. So it becomes possible within a developmental school and even within some of the more developmentally minded organizations that we've talked to that they can um, they can have elements of the curriculum and elements of the lesson, the activities that can be shaped as a kind of kind of collaboration between teachers and learners, which is certainly something that will be alien to a school based on an earlier model, such as the self-discipline school. So the goals that are set and the strategies of how to get there within a self-discipline school are generally not up for any negotiation.
And two easy words maybe to kind of follow up through these stages is the like, what is on the curriculum or what is required of you to do, and how are you going about it? And I'd say self-discipline, there's no negotiation on either of those. What is being taught and how it's being taught, that's being decided by the authority figure, by the teacher, by the principal, by the school.
Yeah, and then you move into the ambition system, which is the system that we see in most mainstream British, Canadian, American schools. And there's a little bit of negotiation within the strategies, and actually in some, let's say in mathematics, for example, that kind of negotiation or taking ownership of the strategies is pushed quite a lot. However, the goals and the aims are generally not up for any negotiation.
You could almost think of this in like a corporate setting with like the boss who says, all right, here's this quarter's objectives. I don't really care how you get there as long as you're getting it, as long as you're making it happen. And
actually, teachers within the school, we're talking about students here, but teachers within the school are essentially put in that kind of position. You know, there's a statistical analysis that's going to be done 2 or 3 times a year where you need to see your students hitting these levels. We have some guidelines on how to do that, and there's obviously a curriculum, but you have autonomy as a teacher to get your kids to this level. And then I think we move towards the kind of schools where I'm working in now, which is an IB school, where there's this deconstruction going on of the environment and the curriculum, and that allows for that negotiation, not only of the strategies you use, but also your goals, your end points. Now, of course, there are times where those goals and strategies are teacher directed or teacher determined, but there is also a big place for a negotiation.
And we're talking about the sensitivity value here with schools like the IB or other schools that focus on like a transdisciplinary approach. That's in these kind of places, they're looking to hand over more of what is covered, what makes up the curriculum to the student so that it's relevant to them and interesting to them. Because sensitivity, schools bring online this idea that it's unlikely one size fits all in terms of content. If you think of like an entire country, let's use Canada, for example, geographically a very vast country, very different living conditions throughout a lot of the parts of the country. The idea that all students across the entire place are served by having the exact same content just seems a little bit silly. And obviously I understand that each province within Canada sets their own curriculum, but even within a province or state, the idea that every single child's stamp needs that same thing going through the system seems weird. So we see this shift towards saying, okay, there's some stuff we're going to require you to learn. You have to do this, but the other half of what you have to do can be decided and negotiated by you.
And I would say my school right now, I guess, hopefully in many ways are on that track beyond the sensitivity value towards this developmental value. And I think that step comes where the context comes in of explicitly deciding which strategies need to be teacher determined, when and how and for what reason, and which goals need to be teacher determined and which are negotiable. And I think what we talked about last week in the in the sensitive in the leadership discussion, but about sensitivity-based schools, was that maybe in some areas there's a reticence to put rules down and guidelines, and that may be where a sensitivity school becomes more of a development school, when it is more explicit that which goals and which strategies are student led, student negotiated, teacher determined, and so on.
Yeah, I think the developmental value brings online or points out something that's been going on since the inception of education at the self-discipline level, to say, hey, we as an institution, we as a school or as an education system have requirements or demands that we are asking of the people who pass through us. And at self-discipline, we're just saying, we know what you need and we know how you are going to carry that out. At ambition, we say, we know our requirements. Here they are. But students and teachers, you have some freedom on how you get there.
Because we believe that maybe you can come up with a more efficient or a better strategy that will then permeate through the culture.
And that there's probably no one perfect way to do all this. One size shouldn't fit all. One size might actually hamper your individual achievement if you're forced to carry it out the way we're dictating it. We'd rather give you the freedom and you find the means that work best.
Which is an example of that was what was called the math wars back in the 90s and noughties that happened in North America. And it was very much the more self-discipline based mindset. There is an algorithm, and if you learn this, you will get to the answer quicker and better.
And there are just steps. Like, once the number is over 10 in this column, you carry the 1, you put this down, you do these steps, and it's never wrong if you do these steps. Exactly.
And then the ambition with some elements of some elements of sensitivity. Sorry, I keep forgetting that word. With some elements of sensitivity, started to kind of say, no, what matters is that you can actually solve the problem yourself. You can take the responsibility. You can have these elements of critical thinking. So yeah, we can teach you the algorithm, but there are several different ways. And by teaching you how to solve problems or how to determine strategies, we are setting you up for a world that will have more open-ended problem solving. And I guess as we move further down towards development, that idea is taken over more. But within schools, there's still this kind of uneasy negotiation or challenge between the teaching the algorithms, and you just have to know it, and it works, and of course it does, and this time for being able to develop your own strategies.
And also just I think where ambition within math or sensitivity in math to some degree steps in and challenges just the teaching of the algorithm, they step in and do that because they're saying, well, do you understand why you do these steps? We don't want you to just like obediently do this. Can you explain why these are the steps? And I just a small anecdote. I remember being in teachers college, and in our math course where we're learning how to teach math, the math professor asked us, like, okay, well, when you do like a triple digit multiplication question, everyone knows you put 2 zeros and then you just start going across and doing the multiplying. And he just asked us, like, can you explain why you just put the 2 zeros there to start? And this is a room of, I think there were 90 of us in the class. Everyone's been university educated. We've all been through the school system in Canada. And, we're wanting to be teachers. and there was not a single person in that room, some of which who'd even done engineering degrees, who could actually explain why you put 2 zeros. But all of us could do the question. We could solve it.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to think that, wow, we've been through this and I can't explain why you do it. I just know that you do it.
And of course, it got you to where you needed to be, but in many other elements, you will have needed to employ critical thinking. And of course, what we would say is the development value would say there's room for both of them. It has to be contextual. It has to be, yeah, there's a point where you're like, boom, I need to be able to do this. But how do you get to that point? How do you walk in the room and determine which algorithm you need to use, or which or what the problem is? And so I think we're moving more towards, and this isn't a discussion about math, but we're moving more towards a space where it's like, can you determine when you need that algorithm? Can you also determine when it's not best and when you need to use some other? And can you even determine from a set of data or from a real world problem what the problem is in the operations? So I guess development hopefully is broadening out the scope of what that might look like, and maybe that math war that went on was the beginning of that. But that's still very much in place. Things move pretty slowly within the world of education. But the original question we started off was, how do the people that we spoke to, how have they defined the student or their beliefs about the student? And I think the Romanian university are in a unique position because their students are already essentially adults, and so they don't have this stigma of negotiating with the students. And so they're in the way they described that essentially you had a mentor and you more or less developed your own ideas and your steps towards that goal, and it didn't need to be aligned to any particular curriculum or any particular set of beliefs or externally pressed kind of values. So in its purest sense, I think that's what we're seeing there in terms of development. So your mentor, yourself, and your goals, and you're negotiating how to get there.
Yeah, and it's almost like at the developmental value, the only real institutional requirement or demand is that you come up with a plan for your learning and how you will organize yourself to learn or engage with or develop in what it is you want to develop and engage in. That's the center of the self-organizing principle of school at the development value.
And it's founded on a belief that the student knows what they need, which is certainly not the belief that underpins a lot of the school systems we've spoken about. But the student walks into the room, and it's the teacher's job to uncover what they need, because the student already knows it, possibly can't voice it, possibly can and needs support in making it clearer and actually following the path to reach their goal. But what a lot of the interviews touched on was this idea of unlearning so that you could uncover your potential and your competencies. So and I think again, Chris at Millennium School, he talked about kids being at their growth edge. And so an underpinning belief in all of the educators we talked about was that students are highly capable and often know what they need. But there's no suggestion that kids know everything or the students know everything and the teachers can take a step back, because obviously that would be the criticism of any kind of hands-off system. There's no suggestion that that's what this is. The suggestion is that the students want to avoid any kind of learned helplessness that sometimes is inherent within the more self-discipline, even ambition system. And with the help of a teacher who can read the signs and help them to bring their needs into a clearer focus, can then bring out themselves. And I think when we talk about school, we initially talked about school having the three main goals of citizenship, work, and self-development or flourishing, or this is the development one. The development kind of paradigm is the first one really that sees that flourishing or self-actualization as being equal with the need to be ready for work and the need to be a positive contributor to society as a citizen.
Yeah, and each of these values is a response to the environment that they're found in. And in 2019, it's almost become a trope, I think, in education to say, like, oh, who knows what the world will be like that we're sending these children to, and the jobs of the future, we don't even know what they are yet. And we've been saying this for like 20 years now.
There'll be no roads. There'll be no roads. There'll be no shops, Rob. There'll be no doctors anymore.
All we know is that everything will be silver looking. There'll be much more metal and
shiny, and
it'll be like the Jetsons, kind of.
Yeah.
We use these tropes of we don't know what skills they'll need, and we don't know what content will be relevant because you can Google everything, and who knows what life will be like after Google. Like, we throw out these very VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity type scenarios of like, this world's rapidly changing. And I think this is where you see the development value arising as a response to these conditions. And I think this is seen throughout all of the interviews we carried out, where that focus gets put on self-development, not because it's nice to do that, or, what a great, let's allow the individual to really shine, although I think that's part of it. But it's more as a response to our actual living conditions to say, like, okay, job market, 20 years from now, realistically, how can I prepare you for the job market? It is genuinely true that it's changing so rapidly, and we don't even know now what skills you need to succeed in 2019. How on earth are we going to guess for 2039 from this point with certainty moving forward? And similar to some degree, the citizenship, it's like our culture, our ways of relating are changing rapidly and drastically. And I'm not in tuned enough with the technological world, but of course, look at the last 10 years of just the impact of social media and how that's changed the way that we interact as a citizenry. And who knows what's coming next? And, again, I'm not well informed on this stuff, but I hear enough talk about, like, the continual introduction of more AI, like artificial intelligence, and the impact that will have on how we carry out our lives as people. And it's like, that's going to have a huge impact on the way we interact. If nothing else, and everyone's wrong about that, like, just the technological changes will continue to change how we operate as cultures worldwide. So it's like, all right, so if the job market's up for grabs and who knows what's needed, if culture's changing at an infinite pace, well, we can work with the individual and ensure that developmentally they're walking into this world with the best possible toolbox for themselves. Because at this value, I guess there's the belief that a adaptable, flexible, developmentally ready individual is the best kind of person to engage with a rapidly changing world.
Yeah. And that's the through line running through all of the conversations. And the thing is, also with this idea of responsivity coming online, the development value is that this also filters down into how we believe the students are. We're responding to their individual needs now across. We as humans and as teachers have always responded to a student's emotional needs, and it's not so much that we're somehow saying that teachers don't care or haven't cared for students in the past. Of course, that's the case, but this is the idea that the school, the classroom, the teachers, the students all have this belief that the response to what is needed within the community sets you up today while you are building for tomorrow as well. And this is the thing we talked about, how the now and the future, the other systems, especially self-discipline and ambition, are very much looking towards next year, 10 years, 20 years down the line with students. With the sensitivity, there's a little bit more of an idea that they're bringing it back to what the needs are today. But the criticism there is maybe at the cost of tomorrow. That is the criticism of, if everybody's included and everybody's taken care of and there's no challenge, and so how are we setting people up to deal with those challenges that come further down the line? I don't think necessarily that's always a justified criticism of sensitivity schools. However, the development school would seek to, again, be explicit and be clear that the students are humans right now and they are living within their own context, but we also have to be aware that part of the role of school, a major part of the role of school, is to prepare them for their adult lives.
And I heard a beautiful quote, or read a beautiful quote on a Facebook post. I'll try to dig it up and put it in the show notes. There was basically a student, I think a teenager, and she was saying in it, these won't be her exact words, and this is a little bit of Rob paraphrasing in here, but as context, we often say like, well, we're building the citizens of tomorrow, and we're teaching the future leaders, and one day our students will be citizens. And this student's quote just said something like, we're not the citizens of tomorrow. We are citizens right now, and we will be citizens later.
Yeah.
And I think that was almost like a development level teal integral flip on how we've been just framing this essentially forever in the way we talk about school. We're not preparing you just for later. You are a citizen right now. You might be 15 or 11 or 18 and still living at home, but you are a part of our citizenry. You're still developing and emerging into it, yes. But right now, you are also part of our collective in our country or within our species. Like, you are a citizen now. And I think it's been a blind spot, perhaps, to overlook the fact that you are a citizen even while you're in school.
Yeah, well, I remember pulling out the Common Core standards when they first came out to take a look at them. And this is an indication of how deeply baked in this idea of preparation for the future is, because the Common Core standards, which are the basis of the American curriculum, so you're talking about tens of millions of students, and they're actually called college and career ready standards. So they're a set of standards that will guide you towards college and career. Now, again, to reiterate and keep reiterating, that is really important. But it just points out that this is a system designed for next year and 5 years down the line. It's not necessarily a system designed to respond to your needs today. And so obviously in our discussion with Joran, who removed his child from school and began to unschool, this was a major life-threatening, life-challenging kind of situation that was exacerbated by the fact that school was not able to respond not just emotionally, but also in terms of academics to the needs of a particular student. And it's also underlying a lot of what Armin said about the students at his school, and also Chris talked to some degree about the students. Maybe the middle school has always been viewed as a place that is where you're confused, and it's supposed to be confused, and there's absolutely no reason for that. The reason why it compounds the biologically driven confusion of adolescence is because it isn't necessarily designed to respond to the needs of somebody who is an adolescent. And schools that we're discussing, developmental schools, are aware of that, and they are saying within our curriculum, within our teaching and learning, we are going to try to be aware and respond to your social, emotional, and academic needs in real time without taking our eye off where we're heading.
And if we look to what are some of the perhaps new subject or content areas within the schools we spoke to, like kind of the mandatory classes or what are the requirements of these schools, they did bring on some new things that I think are certainly absent in the self-discipline value schools. I would say totally absent still in the ambition values. Some things that you would start to see in sensitivity schools. But you start to see the introduction of programs of like nonviolent communication, education, emotional education, courses, lessons, frameworks. Chris Baum from the Millennium School, he talked about, at their assemblies and within the school discussing conflict management strategies. And he used an example of talking to a parent whose child walked their parents through the steps of this kind of conflict situation at home. There was an art focus, as mentioned, at Armin's school, which seemed to be more historically. That was kind of one of the principles that was brought forth by how the school got started. But you begin to actually see, what do you call this category of things? You start to see curriculum beginning to look like value-informed strategies for living, perhaps. Maybe that's too grandiose of a term.
I don't think so, but I think it falls under the umbrella of what would have been social studies,
Sure.
Or what we call in England originally was PSP, physical, social, personal health, and then included citizenship within that. And it essentially was a catch-all term for the things that we're describing here. So this idea of non-violent communication, and Katerina talked about how that is a big part of the things that she brings into schools. And Chris talked about them having an inner work curriculum. So this is that in even saying an ambition school would have a place, but it just wouldn't be given the time necessarily and the mindset that was saying, well, actually, this is underpinning almost everything or everything, because we're going to spend an hour or two a week or a day. I'm not sure how much time, and I want to know a lot more about this. I've asked you a little bit about this. I want to, next time you get hold of Chris, I'd like to really get more details on what that inner work curriculum looks like, and what success looks like within that, and what they how they progress through the course and the applications of it. But these within a development school would be front and center, because they feed into the idea that all of these get you to a place where you know yourself better, therefore you know your strategies and goals that you want to apply in your education. And then if the school is ready to respond to your needs, then we're in a position where we can have a real negotiation. And that, again, I'd say within some IB schools, that's definitely there and it's coming online. And what Chris and to some extent Armin were talking about was having much more of that.
Yeah. I'd actually even go back, maybe retract what I said 2 minutes ago. Not that you don't see this. As you pointed out, a lot of curriculums have, I think, their version of this. And for sure, even within a self-discipline, let's say, stereotypically over the top traditional German school, like you still have your ethics classes.
Yeah.
The ambition for sure. I grew up, we had health class in Ontario. And I think there was it was shifting between ambition towards sensitivity at the time I was a student. But, there was still this idea, like you said, of social health and the well-being. And I'd say that's evolved for sure more within the Ontario curriculum from what students are experiencing now. But I guess what you pointed out is the difference between maybe those first three and the development approach is that there's still 1, maybe 2 periods a week, probably end of the day, Friday, do a couple games, some feel good projects, get some good information in there. But they're thrown in as another subject, and it's another content area, and you'll get a grade on it. And I think sensitivity begins to bring these things more to the center, but it's at the development value. And I might be putting some words into the mouths of people here, but it's almost like, no. This is where we start. These kinds of practices support the way we believe we should be with each other, of being present, of being authentic, of being tuned into what's arising in this moment, attuning to our needs individually and collectively in this group, our ability to know what we want and execute a process towards creating a structure and a system and a culture that will support that. It's like, if those are the things you want to do, then you can trace them back to these kinds of practices that are, I guess, supporting and building an individual's capacity for presence and authenticity and tuning into a sense of purpose and tuning into self-responsibility and tuning into your ability to be, how do you say this? You are able to propagate the kind of culture you want through your actions. These kinds of practices are at the center of that. And that's why they're not just Friday afternoon activities. They're front and center and being addressed within the school.
Well, and I think, a lot of schools now, including the schools we've worked at, will have assemblies and will have values around the school that are shared, and they're definitely promoted. But within a development school, it would be that they, as much as possible, guide everything. Okay, so maybe it's kind of time to talk a little bit more about the practical kind of processes of learning, or the curriculum documents themselves. So before we jump into maybe what a development school might look like, just briefly, self-discipline schools essentially didn't have curriculum written down in a form that was shared. An individual teacher or maybe a school might have a set of guidelines. And of course, now schools that are still operating under self-discipline would have national curriculums, but they came out much more under the ambition kind of led paradigm.
Yeah, and often schools within the self-discipline way of being put their reliance for curriculum on an authority source. And most often that's a textbook series or some kind of program that informs what the teacher does in the class, which informs what the students are doing. And there's almost like a bit of a trust or a bit of a faith that, well, these people understand the ins and outs of the curriculum. And therefore, if we do what they have said, we're for sure meeting the needs of our our curriculum. Or perhaps in the more historical context, let's say in the age before national curriculums, it was more just, well, the kids will learn how to read or write or spell or do their math if they work through these programs.
It was just a set of shared beliefs of how we were going to get people ready for the next step, or how we're going to transfer our culture. So this was the beginnings of school. It was just everybody knew what you needed to learn at school. It was common sense, your reading, your writing, your arithmetic, and some morals.
And it's largely, as you hinted at, it's unspoken. You kind of just know. It doesn't need to be written down. You know,
well, if you need it written down, you don't know it, and so you're obviously not in a position of authority, and you need to keep quiet and learn it.
Yeah,
essentially. But then we see,
someone says, "Hey, tell me what it is. Articulate this."
Articulate it with this cane. You will learn it good.
And in ambition, we do start to get clear on exactly what those kids have been doing and what our objectives were, because we move into the mindset that wants to record and theoretically objectively measure both progress, but more specifically achievement within the ambition paradigm.
But how this began is because as examinations and certification became more important, then they would almost tests would be reverse engineered, so we would know what was going to be on the test, so we would teach that, and a curriculum would evolve from that. There would be a feedback loop between textbooks and exams, and teachers would change that. This is the era kind of I'm growing up in the 80s and 90s. I'm at school, and there's no national curriculum yet per se, but everybody knows what needs to be taught because of the textbooks and the tests. And then around the early 90s, around most English-speaking countries, national curriculum essentially evolved, and then we had what we have now, which is a pretty codified set of standards that are, negotiated for their levels of specificity. So within a science curriculum, there is an ongoing discussion and kind of tussle between the more abstract and skills-based kind of objectives and the more specific and knowledge-based objectives. And the question's always, with each iteration of the curriculum, how much of each do we have, and which skills and which pieces of knowledge?
And can you give like one example from science, like what the more abstract might look like versus the more concrete approaches to curriculum?
So an abstract one may be that students can make accurate observations, or students can generate questions that can be tested, can generate a hypothesis or something. So these are quite skills based. They're very open. And then you may also have students will be able to recognize the leaves from these particular 5 trees. And in some cases, those 2 objectives sitting uneasily next to each other on the same curriculum is like, of course, if you can create a hypothesis from any real world situation, great. Maybe obviously I'm going to argue against that. Maybe there's not 5 trees and 5 leaves that you would really need to know. Not that it is useless or a bad thing to know. It's just that within the context of science and within the amount of time you have, maybe that knowledge base is not quite what is needed. And you yourself, I know, have tested this. This isn't really a discussion about curriculum. Why don't you tell us the little your story you have about the states of Germany?
What story is this? My rap? Which part?
Is it the states one where you gave everybody the test, and you gave them a week to revise? Yeah?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Got it. So, yeah, when I was teaching in Germany, as with, I think, almost any country in the world, at some point, you're asked, do you know the states or the capital cities of the country you live in? We did this in Ontario about Canada, and I think it's a pretty common thing. And I know in the States, I forget the name of it right now, but there's like an award you get if you can name all the states and all the capitals by a certain grade. We did the States of Germany test, the 16 states, along with the city states. And, the kids knew this was an important test. It was before their gymnasium recommendations, which, you want to have the best possible marks going into that so that you can be kind of selected for the university track within Germany. And essentially, all of the kids got perfect on the test. Pretty much everybody got perfect on it. It was an easy thing. You either know the states or you don't. The kids drilled them, practiced them, memorized them. They knew their states and the capitals. So this was, let's say, September, October in the year. It's got 100% almost across the board. Then, just to be a jerk, sometime around March, I was questioning how long students were retaining information, because within this context, we weren't doing what we call a spiral curriculum, where you come back throughout the year to discuss stuff you've already discussed. My planning, my classes, all this sort of stuff. We kind of did a 1 month unit in September, but we never really talked about that stuff again all year. Did another unit in October. We didn't talk about what we had done in September. That was done, door closed. We're moving on to the next thing. And I obviously had my own suspicions that this wasn't the best possible thing. So in March, I decided to give the kids the German state quiz again to see how they would do. One student passed the test, and essentially everybody else in the class remembered 2 or 3 of the states. And it was pretty much the one they live in, and like one that maybe their grandparents or a family member or something like that lived in. So this was an interesting example of these students in September met the curriculum expectation. So I should have just ticked the box and be like, these kids can do this. But by March, those same kids could not meet the same curricular expectation.
So we potentially opened a huge can of worms of a discussion here about retention of knowledge and all of those things. But I just wanted to touch on that because that is still the ongoing kind of tussle within the curriculum, within the ambition paradigm that still kind of rules the roost, between how much does there need to be knowledge-based and how much skills-based. Now, I would always go for skills-based, but I would say that once you then move into a sensitivity school, you start to see it becoming even more abstract. So you may then become more conceptual in your kind of objectives, as in the students are able to take real world concepts and inquire into them with a scientific process. So this is kind of even bigger, but obviously there's you would dig into that, and there would be sub kind of goals within that. But what we would see as we move more into sensitivity and then is that we're loosening up even further what those expectations could be, with the knowledge that the more we acknowledge the differences within students, within their current needs and their future needs, the more we have to take those goals wider and bigger, more transdisciplinary, I would say, so that we can then address needs as they arise. And then what we see when we get to the development school is that there's that concept there of the curriculum being very malleable and being something that students are identifying their own steps, designing their own learning. There's a coaching model rather than a set teaching model. And then this filters into the idea of students having agency and really trying to apply their learning meaningfully into the real world. Now, all of this sounds great, but of course is incredibly difficult to do. And a lot of the schools we spoke to are working on a 1-to-1 ratio. The Romanian University in Armin's Tagesschule, and I think the Millennium School has a higher ratio, but it's still relatively small. I think
it's not one teacher to 30 students in a room.
It's not a 1 to 30 or even a 1 to 15 to 20 that you might find in a private school. In many of these cases, you're talking 1 to 5 or less. And so, of course, that makes that process simpler, but still, in its core, it has taken what the self-discipline school had, and it's been deconstructed and then put back together in a way that is meaningful for each individual student. What this requires is incredibly skillful teachers who know those curriculums. It's not like the teachers are making up what students need. They're aware of the many opportunities that are there, and they are skillfully negotiating how students move forward. And that is not to say that this would be easy in any sense. In every conceivable way, it's more difficult if you want to do it well. And so unschooling, where the parent is attempting to do this, and they're not trained as a teacher, they would have to be highly attuned to what the student or what their student was showing. And then it's a case of, I'm going to get into this idea of health. What is healthy for this student in terms of their academic, their social, their emotional development? And so when you get to a 1-to-1 ratio and you have that mindset and you're working for the good of the student, what's best for the student within, and not necessarily just in a selfish individualistic mode, but also, as we said, moving forward to be a citizen, to be a worker, to be an individual. You're now dealing with an uncountable amount of possibilities. And so this is where we'll keep coming back to this idea that a development school requires highly skilled teachers and or highly attuned to human needs and human development, which would mean someone like Joran, who is teaching their child at home, is highly attuned to the needs of himself and his child as a person, and starting from that position rather than starting from all the other way down the end of the spectrum with, like, here I have a list of things on the curriculum, and you now need to do all of these things, and I'm going to force you, maybe help you to do these things. But that's just, there's two ends of the spectrum there.
And I think and again, to be fair, we see some of this within the sensitivity schools, but I think, again, it becomes more of a focus in the development framework. There's the idea that, like, the buck doesn't have to stop with the teacher. I think we saw this in the Romanian Alternative University. We saw this in the Millennium School, that the teacher also becomes a contact point to others, quote unquote, in the world, or at least, quote unquote, outside of school. So getting connected to real world businesses, real world people, activists, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're putting you in touch with resources that exist beyond the walls of the school. Whereas I think to a large degree in the sensitivity value, for sure in the ambition and self-discipline, the idea was that school's supposed to be a self-contained unit. You come here, we've got everything you need within the walls of this school to a large degree to get you ready for the real world out there. And sensitivity certainly has a place for this, but I think development puts it front and center to say, yeah, if we limit you to only what's available and possible within these walls of the school, that's not serving your ultimate development. There are certain places where we, within this institution, within this place, or even within our culture, maybe aren't the most apt thing that you're needing right now. Let us help you get in touch with whoever, or even stepping back one step further and just saying, hey, how are you going to find somebody who can help you better than we can? And giving that autonomy to the student.
And again, going back to my school, which is an IB school, and we're also running, I'm in the primary program, but we're running the middle years program. And at our best, we are doing that. The students are currently going through, setting up their community kind of project. My son's doing his, and I yesterday served on a Dragon's Den style panel where the middle school students presented their ideas for these community-based projects, and they were all fantastic, and they'd identified different communities. And so at our best within this development, within the sensitivity schools, and my school is somewhere on, hopefully on that cusp between sensitivity and development. At our best, we're doing that. But, of course, it's incredibly hard to do. The middle school teachers are working so hard to get this one project going, and they're making fantastic links with the community as well. And the more established that becomes, the easier that is to do. But yeah, it is alien, and it has been alien even to my school until I'd say this year or maybe the last couple of years. So it's definitely happening there, and it's definitely even happening in not that my school, my IB school, is mainstream, but it's definitely happening in more schools that are closer to the mainstream. Very, very hard to do. I'll have to keep saying that because I'm watching it unfold in front of me, and I'm talking to people, and it's like,
well, come on, what's so hard about it? What are the biggest challenges you're seeing?
So I think that the teachers in the middle school are doing an awesome job of setting up the kids to actually set their goals, identify the community, and then they've got to bring the kids into in line with the real world of what's possible and how you communicate and how you put them in touch with people. Now, we're part of the YMCA. It's a huge organization. We've got lots of links already, and we're reaching out to other kind of groups, and I just think that the amount of support a student needs initially to generate those ideas, find those people, and then see that through. And this will be once within their year or 2-year cycle. That just takes a lot of time, effort, and organization. And however valuable it is, many people who are not in the developmental mindset might want to be stripping that back and not doing more of it. So it wouldn't be that, okay, this is essentially going to be...
Stripping it back and replacing it with what instead?
Stripping it back, making it something that could be done quicker on a smaller scale so that the lessons could then follow more of a more standard curriculum that was leading towards maybe a body of knowledge or a set of skills that would then be put onto a test. And what we're seeing here is this is more of the application of those skills. So in terms of your Bloom's taxonomy, I hope people who are listening are maybe familiar with that idea that there's levels of thinking skills, and the lowest level is just a retention of knowledge, and then you get into the comprehension of that. The next kind of step up are analysis and application. So what the students are doing in these particular projects is that they are not only comprehending how these agencies work, or these societies, these communities work, and their needs, they're also analyzing those needs, and then they're applying their current knowledge to kind of meet those needs. Now, that's 2 extra steps of higher order thinking beyond what would happen in most classrooms. There may be some minor elements of application of knowledge, but a lot of what we see within ambition, self-discipline, especially ambition kind of test oriented kind of work, is that there is not so much of the application, because it's really hard to test application in many ways. It's much easier to test comprehension. So there'll be a lot of comprehension, and so you may explain your thing.
Yeah, let's give one concrete example, because I think this is common parlance for you or I, but someone who's maybe just following along with what we've just said, is a simple example. Like if you're on that lower level comprehension level, this is probably like your test just looks like a diagram where you're filling in the blanks of, let's say, maybe ecosystems isn't the one to go with here, but
I'd even go down to that's just retention of knowledge. So that's just knowledge.
Something back.
Just repeating something back, and we don't actually know how much you know, or your depth of knowledge, or your depth of comprehension. So, a gap fill, or just answering questions that require an answer. Like, what is the name of the person hosting this podcast? It's Rob McLeod. There you go. You have retained that knowledge. Now, if we want comprehension, we would say, okay, so can you tell me a little bit about what the people on this podcast are talking about? Can you explain it? Okay, well, they're talking about development schools, they're talking about curriculum and students, they're talking about how schools are responsive. Okay, so good, you've shown me that you comprehend. That's generally where your mainstream schools would stop. Now, the application analysis of this might be, okay, can you break down what their strengths and weaknesses were they were saying within the development school? Can you actually break down what you think the developmental school might be? And analyze from what they've said. Can you analyze strengths and weaknesses? Can you compare things? And then we get into the thing that we're talking about now, which is application. Okay, you've shown me that you understand a little bit about Rob McLeod's developmental school ideas. Can you apply something he said to a different context? Okay, well, he said that we're talking about students sometimes get to develop their own next steps. Okay, well, I'm going to go over here to my school tomorrow, or to my sports club, and I'm going to talk to the coach or the teacher, and I'm going to say, here's what I think my next step will be. Am I allowed to do it? And I'm going to negotiate my next step. So what I've done there is I've taken a piece of knowledge, I've taken it to a new context, and I've applied it. So in terms of these middle school students, what they've done is they've had to look into their local communities, analyze it to find a need, and then use what they already know about the community, about the potential solutions to the need, and do some research, of course, and then they need to apply that knowledge to solve the problem or to help the community get over this. As you can see just from the description, that's way more difficult to assess. How you're doing it, how well you're doing it, time frames, support needed. Much easier if I give you a reading comprehension with a couple of questions, maybe even an essay question. It's still only really assessing your comprehension.
That was masterfully done, O'Leary.
Well, thank you, Rob McLeod. It was a slow start earlier. We're gonna have to pineapple. We're gonna have to have a glass of pineapple juice soon. But
one last point where I would like to wrap this up.
Maybe we can flip this part. Maybe we can put this as the first part of the podcast, and the bit at the beginning where I'm forgetting what I want to say in my own name. You might. How about you flip that? Go on. Go ahead.
I want to go to something you shared with me just this morning in a Facebook message between the two of us, which was, you said in your school right now, you're wanting to try and clarify what are the bare necessities, what are the absolute must-haves, what has to be taught in the school, what can we shore that list down to, and can we open up the rest of our time, the rest of our attention towards well-done, student-led inquiries, essentially. So maybe to sum up this conversation, one of the through lines between all four values in education is this idea of the negotiation between what is the institution requiring of you and how much autonomy do you as the individual student have. So in a development school, If you're looking at a school similar to yours that might be making this transition from the sensitivity paradigm into development, how do you decide? How do you do that? The cutting of the list down to the bare necessities, the bare
Well,
minimum of what has to be on the curriculum.
so within the IB, there is a framework of transdisciplinary skills. They call them approaches to learning. And there's already a bunch of social skills, self-management, thinking, research, and communication skills, but they're just headings really. And so those, bringing those front and center as basically a set of skills that go over all subjects. And then really, there's no answer, right? There's no answer as to what is a non-negotiable. And here's the activity I like to do with a few people. I say, okay, tell me 10 things that absolutely must be taught before 6th grade. And everyone will go, you got to know how to read. And I'll say, what do you mean? You mean like sound out the letters? And yeah, you got to know how to be able to read the letters. And when you see a page in front of you, read it all. You got to be able to count and add and subtract. Okay, so all right, let's count those as 3 or 4 things. Okay, you got to be able to read. You got to be able to physically write the letters. You've got to be able to count, add, subtract, multiply, divide to 2, 3 digits or whatever. Okay, what else? And then like literally everybody gives you a completely different set of answers. So this would be my challenge to anybody listening now. So like, let's assume being able to count and do your 4 operations, plus, minus, multiplication, division, that's a given by grade 6. Let's say you also need to be able to read the words on a page and write the words on a page. Okay. Now give me 7 or 8 other things that are absolutely non-negotiable. I'm not going to put you on the spot now, Rob, because you probably give me a bunch of hippie stuff. No, I won't put you on the spot, but it's a good activity to do, and you'll get some interesting answers, especially once you get past number 5 or 6. Number 7, Rob. Don't cry when you hear number 7. Number 7. It's always, you're always get off into taxes. People talk about you got to learn how to do your taxes, and it's really true. And so we don't teach you. Or you got to learn how to compose an email or a letter. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But it's really interesting to have that discussion and say, so but as a group of teachers, you know, we're going to start having this discussion anyway. We've got the Common Core. We've used parts of Alberta. We've used parts of Ontario curriculum. So like looking at bits of that and boiling it down is a good place to start. But yeah, your question of how do you get down to the absolute bare bones? First of all, I think you have to be really brave to be like, this is not something that everybody needs to know at this point. And that's easy with some of the knowledge-based stuff, like the leaves in the tree. You can probably cut that as a specific piece of knowledge, because on a higher level, you've probably got something that talks about investigating life cycles and talks about investigating aspects of living things. So it may be that although you don't actually look at those particular trees, you will still look at how living things grow and live. But at the bottom, by peeling back and allowing yourself to do this, you kind of realize how wide open it is. And it comes down to your values. It comes down to what do you believe you need to put front and center. And what's holding, I'd say, many schools back is more a worry of how it's perceived and how it might not necessarily work without that huge framework holding you in place. And so this is the negotiation we'll have, and I'm guessing a lot of other schools will have, of how you move towards what we know is more necessary, of a wider, more responsive framework, without necessarily losing too much of what we gain from having that more stricter and formal framework.
Yeah, I think, again, we come back to values as what informs all of these decisions. Because I was taking your list activity in mind there. And once you get past those obvious, like, oh, I need to read, write, do some maths, then Well, even for those, but anything that gets added to that list, I wouldn't care about the content of what the thing was. I'd just say, oh, that's interesting. Why does that have to be on there? Not that it has to be on there. Why is that important? And I'm sure any of those things, eventually you'd peel back enough layers and you get down to the root of some value or belief about how a human being is supposed to spend their life on this planet before they die. That's
the key point, yeah.
And I think you also nailed it. You said there's not one way to whittle this back. There's not going to be a universal core curriculum of these are the bare essentials every human being on this planet needs. Yeah. What I think is going to happen is as more groups of people, likely on a small scale to begin with, get together and have these authentic conversations about, hey, what's our top 10 list here? What has to be on here and why? And does that exploration into those deep shared values? From that place, you'll see a diversity of curriculum that are responsive to that group of people and authentically arise out of them. And I guess at their best, it might be able to meet the needs and true authentic values of the people who are actually involved with that, as opposed to being imposed from outside.
Absolutely. I think you kind of got it there. And I think we will definitely come back to curriculum. It's a really rich topic because it underpins so much of what happens within school, and it's a big interest of both of ours for that very reason. I appreciate having the chance to speak to you about this stuff, and take it easy.
Brendan O'Leary, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We hope this episode has been interesting. If you want to connect, we're on Twitter, or you can join our private Facebook group just searching Reinventing Education Podcast. Request and we'll let you in. We're kind of building a community there. So far, it's kind of been sharing news stories that reinforce our narrative about the 4 values, competing against one another in education. But let's see if we want to organize to do more than that there. Feel free to pass this episode on to others who give a damn about what's going on in education. From Brendan and myself, attention is a valuable thing these days. Thanks for having some of yours on what we're saying.